Unit 1, Part 2, we've just said that our task is to distinguish good from bad deductive arguments. The master concept of the course is validity. Right? A good deductive argument is a valid argument. So when I say our task is to distinguish good from bad arguments, I mean, in the main, our task is to distinguish valid from invalid arguments. Now we've just said what it is that makes a good deductive argument a good deductive argument. A good or valid argument is one where it is necessarily the case that if the premises are true, then the conclusion is also true. Or it's one where it's not possible for the premises to be true and the conclusion to be false. Okay? Now, the most crucial opening point that you have to grasp is how this definition of a good or valid deductive argument is divorced from the question of the truth or falsity of the sentences that go into making the argument. Once again, an argument is a set of sentences separated into premises and conclusion, where the premises give you reasons for believing the conclusion. Right? So notice from that definition, a mere set of sentences is not yet an argument. Right? If I say, Dan is Australian, comma, all Australians are surfers, comma, Dan is a surfer, that is not yet an argument if it's just a set of sentences, right? But if I say the first two sentences and then therefore Dan is a surfer, Dan is Australian, all Australians are surfers, therefore Dan is a surfer, the therefore indicates that that third sentence is the conclusion, and there we have the set of sentences in fact separated into premises and conclusion. Premises give you reasons for believing the conclusion. Okay? Now the crucial thing to hear in the definition of a good or valid deductive argument is the word if, right? If the premises are true, the conclusion would also be true. That's a good deductive argument. Notice that that can be so even if the premises, those sentences, are not themselves true, right? It can be a good argument, a valid argument, when it's the case that if the premises are true, the conclusion is also true. If that's so, we say the truth of the premises force the truth of the conclusion. We say the premises imply the conclusion. Those things can be so even when the premises are not, in fact, true. Okay? What's true and false? Not arguments. Okay? Distinguish the concepts which apply to sentences and the concepts which apply to arguments. Truth and falsity apply to sentences, right? Just specific individual claims, sentences. Those things are true and false. They are not valid or invalid. They are true or false. They are not valid or invalid, right? Validity and invalidity apply to arguments, right? Sets of sentences, premises and conclusion. Validity and invalidity apply to the connection between premises and conclusion. Either the premises do imply the conclusion, right, or they do not. Right? Either it is the case that it's not possible for the premises to be true and the conclusion false, or it is not. Right? So truth, falsity applies to sentences. Validity and invalidity, those concepts do not apply to sentences. They only apply to arguments. So truth and falsity don't apply to arguments. An argument is not true or false. The sentences that the argument consists of, they are true and false. But the argument itself is not true or false. It's either valid or invalid. Okay? All right. So look at these two sample arguments. They're very much like the ones Klenk has on page 9. At the top of page 9 is a sort of similar and to serve the same purpose, which is to get you to understand the distinction between the question of the truth and falsity of sentences versus the question of the validity or invalidity of an argument. Right? So we've got P1, premise 1, P2, premise 2, and this is how we write conclusions, right? Triple dot, like that, slash triple dot. See that all through your textbook. Okay, so here's an argument. First premise, if Dan is made of cheese, then Dan is Australian. Premise 2, Dan is made of cheese. Conclusion, if Dan is made of cheese, then Dan is American. Premise 2, Dan is made of cheese. Conclusion, Dan is American. I'm not American, I am Australian. Okay, so if we were to ask after the truth value of these sentences. Truth value is just, right, for our logic, other logics are different, but our logic has two truth values. The truth values are true and false. I talk about truth values, I just mean truth, true or false, right? Okay, Dan is American. That is in fact false, because I'm not Australian. All right, Dan is made of cheese. You can see that that is false, right? If Dan is made of cheese, Dan is American. That's probably false. We got a false conclusion, false premises. But is this a valid or an invalid argument, right? What am I asking you with that next question? I'm not asking you whether the conclusion is true. I'm asking you that, is it the case that if those premises were true, would the conclusion also follow of necessity? If those premises are true, would it necessarily be the case that this is also true, right? Would the truth of the conclusion be, would the truth of the conclusion be forced by the truth of the premises, right? I'm not asking you whether the premises are true. That is irrelevant to the question, right? Logic is about inference. It's about the relation between premises and conclusion, right? This bit, the relation between the posited truth value of these, right, and the truth value of the conclusion, right? So for the purpose of answering this question, whether it's a valid argument or not, right, whether it is or is not the case that the truth of the premises would force the truth of the conclusion, you sort of assume that the premises are true, right? What does the truth of the conclusion follow from the truth of the premises? Or would the truth of the conclusion follow from the truth of the premises? Which is a question you need to answer whether or not the premises are true. See what Klenk says about the nuclear scientist investigating the consequences of a nuclear meltdown, right? You still want to know what would happen, even if this, you still would like to know the consequences of a nuclear meltdown at this plant, even though you're very much hoping that the plant does not, in fact, melt down. That is, even though you're very much hoping that it is false that this nuclear reactor melts down. Okay? Right, and here, this is in fact a valid argument. It is the case that if these premises are true, it's necessarily the case that the conclusion is also true. This is an argument where it is not possible for the premises to be true and the conclusion to be false. Or it is not possible for the premises to be true and the conclusion to not also be true, right? Because just think, if, in fact, when you investigate getting arguments, you are given the premises as if they are true, right? You're just assuming the premises are true. If you say, I don't think that's true, not your concern. You're not your concern as a logician, right? Maybe if you're a biologist, you're looking at some other disciplines, as Klenk says, determine the truth or falsity of the particular sentences. But as a logician, your task is to determine whether conclusions follow from premises. Evaluating arguments, not sentences for truth or falsity. And if this is a valid argument, right? Because if it's the case that if Dan is made of cheese, then Dan is American, right? This tells you that if I'm made of cheese, then I am in fact American. And the second premise tells you I'm made of cheese. So if it's true, right, if it's true that I'm made of cheese, and if it's also true that if I'm made of cheese, then I'm American, it follows of necessity that I am American, right? So this is a valid argument, even though it's false that I'm American, even though the premises are false. It's a valid argument because if the premises are true, the conclusion will also be true, okay? All right, I'll end this part here and come back and do argument 2.